Silver on the Tree by Susan Cooper. Chapter 6, The Bearded Lake. There was no rain at first, though clouds swirled over the blue sky like billowing smoke. Silent for want of breath, they toiled up the long winding lane that led from the village of Aberduffy into the hills. The road rose very steeply, climbing out of the broad valley of the Duffy estuary, so that whenever they paused to look back they could see, spread beneath them, a widening sweep of the coast and hills and the broad sea, and the silver ribbon of the Dovey River, snaking through gleaming acres of brown gold sand left by the falling tide. Then another bend in the lane cut away all this southern view, and they were left climbing toward the mountains of the north, not yet visible. High grassy banks enclosed them in the lane, banks as high as their heads, starred with yellow ragwort and hawkweed, white flat heads of yarrow, and a few late foxgloves. Higher yet above the banks, hedges of hazel and bramble and hawthorn reached to the sky, heavy with half-ripe berries and nuts, and fragrant with invading honeysuckle. "Keep in!" Will called from the rear. "Car!" They pressed themselves against the grass wall of the lane, dodging prickly embrace of bramble shoots, while a bright red mini whipped past in a tense snare and a tenor snarl of low gear. "Visitors," Bran said. "That's the 6th. "We're visitors too," Jane said. "Ah, but such a superior brand," said Barney solemnly. "At least you were walking on your legs," Bran said. He resettled and peaked Swedish-type cap, He resettled the peaked Swedish-type cap he wore over his white hair and gave it a resigned tug. "All those cars, they are like flies on a sunny day this time of year. And because of them, up in the wild places, you find not just the sheep and the wind and the emptiness now, but the little wooden chalets for people from Birmingham." "No way out of it, is there?" Simon said. "I mean, there don't seem to be many ways left of making a living round here except tourism." "Farming, too," said Will. "Not for many." "True enough," Bran said. "The ones who go away to college after leaving school, they never come back. Nothing for them here." Jane said curiously, "Will you go away?" "Duh," Bran said. "Have a heart. That's years away. Anything could happen. Power stations in the estuary, holiday camps on Snowdon." "Watch out," Simon said suddenly. "Another one." This time the car was pale blue, chugging and coughing past them like a small tank. 2 small children could be seen fighting in the back seat. It disappeared round the next bend. Cars, said Will. "Do you know there's even something on the Macklineth Road called a chattel? A chattel! Presumably a cross between a motel and a..." He broke off, staring at the road ahead. "Look at that! Golly!" Barney grabbed Jane's arm, pointing. "Whatever are they?" Paused halfway across the lane. A few yards ahead of them were 2 strange, sinuous animals, as big as cats but slender-bodied. Their fur was reddish ginger, like the coat of a red fox. They had cat-like tails held just above the ground. Their heads were turned, bright-eyed. They stared at the children. Then first one, then the other, deliberately, without haste, turned back and made off in a slinking, undulating motion across the road, apparently disappearing into the bank. "Stoats!" Simon said. Barney looked doubtful. "Weren't they too big?" "Much too big," said Bran. "And they had white only on the muzzle. A stoat has a white belly and chest." "What were they, then?" "Eurofabrato, polecats. But I've never seen one bright red before." Bran went forward and peered cautiously at the bank, raising a warning hand as Simon joined him. "Carefully. They are not nice creatures. There's a rabbit hole. They must have taken it over." "Funny the cars don't seem to bother them," Barney said. "Or people, for that matter." "They are not nice," Bran said, looking thoughtfully at the hole. "Vicious, not afraid. They even kill for fun." "Like the mink," Will said. His voice was husky. Impatiently he cleared his throat. Jane noticed with surprise that he seemed to have turned very pale. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and one of his hands was tight clenched. Mink, Bran said. We don't have those in Wales. They look like those, only black or brown, I think. They enjoy killing too. Will's voice still seemed strained. Jane watched him out of the corner of her eye, trying not to appear curious. There's a farm just round the corner. That might be why they're about the place in daytime. Bran seemed to have lost interest in the polecats as he strode up off the lane. Come on, it's a long way yet. Jane paused to pull up a sock and let the boys pass her, then followed alone and thoughtfully. Above the farm, the lane widened a little. The grass banks dropped to a mere foot or so, topped sometimes by wire fencing. The way led more gently uphill now, through rock-studded grassland where Welsh black cattle grazed here and there, or stood contemplatively in the middle of the road. Jane warily skirted a large bullock and tried to collect the elusive feelings that were running like quicksilver in and out of her mind. What was happening? Why was Will anxious, and why did Bran, on the contrary, seem to feel nothing? And anyway, who was this Bran? She felt a vague, formless resentment of the way his presence somehow complicated their relationship with Will. It's not just us anymore, she thought, the way it was last time. And over everything, she was beginning to feel a great unease about whatever lay ahead, as if some sense at the back of her mind were trying to tell her something she did not consciously know. Then, walking blindly, she bumped into Barney and found all the others standing still in sudden silence, and looked up and saw why. They were on the rim of a magnificent valley. At their feet, the hillside dropped away in a sweep of waving green bracken, where a few sheep precariously grazed on scattered patches of grass. Far, far below, among the green and golden fields of the valley floor, a road ran like a wavering thread, past a toy church and a tiny farm, and across the valley beyond its further side, patched blue with cloud shadow and dark with close-planted fir. There rolled in line after line the massing ancient hills of Wales. "Oh," Jane said softly. "Gwermathlon," Bran said. "Happy Valley," said Will. "Now you see why they call this path Panorama Walk," Bran said. "This is what brings the cars, the walkers too, fair play." "Wake up, Jane," Will said lightly. Jane was standing quite still, staring out over the valley, her eyes wide. She turned her head slowly and looked at Will, but did not smile. It's, I can't explain. Beautiful, lovely, but frightening somehow." "Vertigo," Simon said confidently. "You'll feel better in a minute. Don't look over the edge." "Come on," Will said expressionless, suddenly reminding her of Merriman. He turned and continued up the path along the edge of Happy Valley. Simon followed. "Vertigo, my foot," Jane said. Bran said curtly, "Frightening my foot too. If you start listening to silly feelings up here, you will never stop. Will has enough to worry about without them." Astonished, Jane stared, but he had turned and was plodding up the road again with Simon and Will. She looked crossly after him. "Who does he think he is? My feelings are in my head, not his." Barney stuck his fingers into the knapsack straps over his shoulders. "Now perhaps they'll understand what I meant yesterday." Jane raised her eyebrows. "Up on the hill over the sea," Barney said. "That was sort of frightening too. When I was sure I'd been there before and you both said rubbish. Only I've been thinking it's really more like living inside something that's happened before, without its really having happened at all." They went on in silence after the others, and we'll pause there.